Hey friends, it's Sarah and it's January 2025, so that means it's time to talk about my year in reading for 2024. So to start off, I want to talk about some of my reading stats for the past year. I still use Goodreads, so most of these are just pulled from Goodreads wrap up. So first up, I read 207 out of my goal of 200 books, so smash that, excellent. That amounted to 63,219 pages. That sounds like a lot, but I have no idea, honestly, whether that's a ton of pages or not. The shortest book that I read last year was The Six Deaths of the Saint by Alex E. Harrow, and that was a short story coming in at 31 pages. The longest book that I read was The Phoenix of Destiny by Geronimo Stilton, and that was 581 pages. The average book length that I read last year was 305 pages, so I read a lot of shorter books. The most popular or most shelved on Goodreads book that I read was The Hunger Games by Suzanne Collins at 11.7 million people shelving it. And then the least shelved was An Absolute Casserole by Alex Horn and Jack Bernhardt at 106 people shelving it. It's a Taskmaster book. My average rating for the year was 4 stars, so I had actually a really good reading year this past year. And the first and last reviews that I wrote were actually both for 3-star romances, so that's interesting. I don't write reviews for every single book that I read, but apparently these ones merited some comments. I also like to track all of the books that I get out from the library to see how much money that saves me during the year, and I ended up getting 159 out of the 207 books from the library, saving me a total of $3,896.62. Now, with all of that being said, I want to talk about the epic highs and lows of my 2024 reading year. We're going to start way down at the bottom with my worst and most disappointing books, as well as the books that I did not finish or DNF'd for this video. And then next video, I'm going to talk about my favorites because, as mentioned, I had a really good reading year, so there's a lot of favorites, a lot of really good reads. So that's going to be a whole other video. First up, in my worst or most disappointing reads of the year, we have Funny You Should Ask by Elissa Sussman. This was 3 stars, so it wasn't the worst book. It was just kind of like, it was fine. I thought it was going to be really good. It was just okay. But this is a romance about a young writer who is tasked with writing an article on a big actor. They spend like a wild weekend together, they get close, and then 10 years later, her career is kind of foundering, and so she has to write another interview with the same actor. This is apparently based on a GQ article about Chris Evans, which I've read is quite interesting. I think there are a lot of debates about the journalistic ethics of this kind of article, but we're not going to talk about that in this video. That's not for me to say. I'm not a journalist. Putting that aside. This was actually my first review of the year, and on Goodreads I wrote, if only they would let each other finish their sentences, they could have avoided so much of the drama. Maybe I just don't like second chance romances with split timelines, but I found it so hard to buy the relationship for about 70% of the book. The samples of the main character's writing also just weren't good. The article was pretty lame, her blog posts were so boring. It's hard to believe that she has had such a successful career from the excerpts of her writing in the book. Then up next we have Hello Beautiful by Napolitano. Again, a 3-star read. I thought it was going to be great because it was being sold as like this homage to Little Women, and I love Little Women so much, but it ended up being a pretty big disappointment for me. This is a literary fiction book that follows a family of 4 sisters and then the lonely boy who they bring into their fold, similar to Little Women. And then there's this giant rupture in the family that causes all this drama and all this like tension in the relationships. I just thought it was fine. It's set in the 70s or 80s, but it really feels like it's set in the 50s. Every time that I remember that it's set in the 70s, I'm like, oh, what? Because in my brain, it's like 50s housewife kind of stuff. So I don't know why they changed it to the 70s, but I think it was maybe originally set in the 50s based on how it's written. I don't know. It's very strange. It wasn't particularly deep and the characters weren't very compelling. Any attempt at an overall theme was just overly explained, so it didn't feel like there was any depth beyond the surface level. There was no real nuance. It was just spelled out for you on the page. It was like, he's feeling this way because of this thing. And oh, look, we're talking about this again. So I think it's a good intro to literary fiction, where you can discuss themes, but you don't have to go looking for them because they are spoon-fed to you. So if you're kind of like getting into that genre for the first time, maybe it's a good entry level to that, but it just was not what I thought it was going to be. Up next, we have Men Have Called Her Crazy by Anna-Marie Tendler, another 3-star read. This is a memoir about the author's time in a psychiatric hospital, as well as snippets from her life when she was negatively impacted by the men around her. However, a lot of her trauma seems to come from her mother, and she doesn't really acknowledge that at all. Like, she says things that her mom did that are like pretty upsetting and abusive, and then just is like, oh, but those men, they sure ruined my life. There were some parts that were quite interesting, and then her chapter where she talks about her dog Petunia made me genuinely emotional, so that saved it from being a 2-star book. I talked a lot more in depth about this book in part 1 of my September reading wrap-up, so I'll link that up top and in the doobly-doo, so you can watch that if you're interested. Then we have Yokohama, Kaidashi, Kikou by Hitoshi Ahinano. This was like a 2-star read, I think, for me, maybe 2.5 stars. I also talked about it in the second part of my September reading wrap-up. Again, I'll put links everywhere. But this is a post-apocalyptic manga about a robot girl who's just kind of like living her life, running her coffee shop. I found it really slow and repetitive. Like, it's like she wakes up, she opens her shop, she serves the same customer, she goes down to the gas station on her scooter, she goes back up. And then there's some like really weird like male gaze kind of stuff going on, and I didn't like that at all. But the art was really nice, so I think I ended up giving it like 3 stars, but it's probably closer to 2.5. Then we have My Roommate is a Vampire by Jenna Levine, or Levine. Again, 3 stars. It was another book that I read in September, so I guess that was not a good month for reading. I think it's because it was the Magical Readathon, so I was reading books specifically for a prompt that I maybe wouldn't have picked up otherwise. So we'll just say that's why September was rough. But this is a romance about a struggling artist who, in a moment of desperation, rents out a room from like a really weird dude, and he ends up being a vampire. The vampire aspects in this were kind of lacking, to be honest, and then the reveal that he was a vampire happened way too quickly. The romance was then super rushed, and then there was like this weird action plot about 3/4 of the way through the book. I don't know. It was kind of strange, but I read it quickly enough that I was like, yeah, it's fine, whatever, 3 stars. It wasn't terrible. I don't really think about it ever, so sure, whatever. But then we're getting down into the 2-star category. I have Finding Mr. Purrfect by Codi Gary. I read A Cat Cafe Christmas, which was the first book in this series, and I loved that one. And this one sadly did not do it for me, but this is a romance about the owner of a cat cafe who fake dates her best friend's boyfriend's best friend, who is also like a one-night stand that she had. I liked all of the cats in this, of course. The complicated family issues were also interesting, but then there was stuff like this weird side character who kept trying to pursue the main character even though she said no and she was in a relationship, and he's like, we can just be friends, but then kept asking her out. That was gross. I think there's a lot of major issues in this that resolved way too easily for my taste. And then, again, like 3/4 of the way through, there was a baking competition plotline that was just kind of like wedged in at the very last moment and was not satisfying. There's like 40 pages of that, and I think that's what should have been this book. Instead of whatever else was happening in this, it should have been the baking competition. So it just, I don't know, the pacing was weird, the characters were weird. It just didn't do work for me, unfortunately. Then we have The Con Queen of Hollywood by Scott C. Johnson, another 2.5-star book. This is a nonfiction book about identity theft in the kind of like upper levels of Hollywood. So the Con Queen would use the identities of high-level female producers and directors to prey upon upcoming photographers and actors and stuff. This book started off pretty interesting, but then failed to elaborate on some of the finer details of those cons. So like to this day, I feel like I still don't understand what the point of the cons were or how the con queen profited from them. There was like a lot of travel and stuff, and I just don't understand how that made the con artist like money. I don't know. The second half of the book was also like really long and vague, and I don't think the author should have included his own family's history in this book, as it didn't really tie into the main like story that we were following. Overall, it was just kind of disorganized and felt unresolved, and I was kind of disappointed. Apparently it was originally a magazine article, and I think that is probably a better read, I'm gonna guess, because the amount of like information that was actually in this book is like the length of a longer magazine article. So if you're at all interested by the Con Queen, I would just say probably find that article, and I think that would be a better bet than reading this whole book. Next we have Canadian Boyfriend by Jenny Holiday. This one was 2 stars, and it was a doozy of a book. I made a whole video about it, and again, I'll link that in this video so you can watch that, but I had a lot of issues with it. So if you'd like a comprehensive review and like spoiler, just I go through the whole book, then you can watch that. But basically this is a romance that follows a dance teacher who had like made up a Canadian boyfriend when she was a teenager to get out of social situations. And she like based him on the stranger that she met while working at Starbucks. And the book now takes place when she's an adult, and she runs into this like stranger that she had based her fake boyfriend on, and ends up kind of like befriending him and becoming a sort of like nanny almost for his daughter. But the chemistry was not great. The main character calls her love interest by his literal like first and last name, like the full name, for in the entire book, which drove me crazy. She never calls him just Mike. It's always Mike Martin. Even in her head, Mike Martin. He never comes without a last name, and I just don't understand that literary choice when there's no other Mike in this thing. There's no like she changes to just his first name to reveal a depth of intimacy in their relationship. She just calls him Mike Martin the entire time, which was really, really rough. The Canadian aspects of this were also like really cliched, which fine, but they're also not accurate half the time, which really ticked me off. The good parts of this book were there were some like good talks around grief and family, and then the like kids' relationship with the main character was sweet, but everything else about this sucked, and I suffered a lot while reading it. Then we have another 2-star romance. This was Unleashed Holiday by Victoria Schade or Schade. I don't know how to pronounce your name, I'm so sorry. But this follows Chelsea, who runs a dog training facility, and then her old nemesis Andrew, who starts a gym in the same complex. They have like a turf war for no real reason, and then making up, and they kind of have like a truce and an exchange where she's gonna like help him train his dog, and he's gonna help her like rehab an injury that he kind of caused. But through this whole book, she knows nothing about him. She is constantly wrong in her assumptions about him, and then is shocked when her comments insinuating that he's a dumb jock hurt his feelings. She's like, oh, you're just like a dumb sports boy. Like, why do you care? Why, I can't believe you like read. And he's like, I have a brain. I think he also has a couple like weird comments about her body, but like her comments about him feel a lot more insensitive. The dogs in this were really cute, but the rest of the plot and the romance made no sense. I don't know why these people like each other. They just seem to make assumptions about each other that are wrong and then half-heartedly apologize. And the best part was, again, the dogs, and the dog training was really good because the author does dog training by trade, so like that was interesting. And there were some fun goat cameos, also great. The rest of it sucked. I don't understand why they were together. That was bad. All right, so those are all the books that I did finish and then did not enjoy. Next up, I want to talk about books that I did not finish. So these are the DNFs of the year. And I think these helped contribute to my higher average star rating, that I was able to weed out ones where I was like, I'm not feeling this, I'm not going to rate it well, and so let's just give up on it. First up, we have Once More with Feeling by Elissa Sussman. I DNF'd this at page 90 out of 416, which good call because I already did not really enjoy her other book that I read, but this one is about an ex-pop star who has a shot at a Broadway role, but the only catch is that it's directed by the guy that she cheated on her boyfriend at the time with, and that's what caused like the scandal that ruined her career and like his career. And I just don't like cheating in books. There's probably like some explanation where it's like, it's okay that she cheated, but I just can't get on board with that. So I stopped reading immediately. Then we have What the River Knows by Isabel Ibañez. This I stopped reading on page 100 of 395. It's a teen book set in the 19th century in Bolivia, and a teenage girl is tragically orphaned and then takes her inherited fortune and sails to Egypt to try and solve her parents' disappearance because she's not convinced that they're actually dead. There's some old magic, there's like an archaeology dig, and I just didn't like the characters. It felt like a TikTok romantasy, and I'm not into that, and the characters just weren't developing quick enough for me, so I gave up on it. Then The Invisible Kingdom, Reimagining Chronic Illness by Megan O'Rourke. I stopped reading at page 80 out of 271. This is a nonfiction book that talks about chronic illness. I didn't have any problems with it, it just had to go back to the library before I could finish reading it, and I might come back to it some other time. Nothing against it, it just bad timing when I picked it up. Then we have Shut Up You're Pretty by Taya Mutonji. I stopped reading this on page 20 out of 132, and this is a series of stories that follows a Congolese girl and her family as they immigrate to Canada, and then she like grows up into a woman. There's a lot of really intense issues. It was just too disturbing for me. I thought it was just going to be the same character going through the most horrendous things possible. Like there was sexual assault, and I think there's like a teenage pregnancy at one point, and I was like, I don't want to read this. It's just going to be her suffering endlessly for 132 pages and then the end. So I decided to not read that. Then we have A Love Song by Ricki Wilde by Tia Williams. I stopped reading this on page 76 out of 339. It is a romance where Ricki moves to Harlem to follow her dream of opening a flower shop, and then she meets like a mysterious stranger one night and they have a connection. There's a touch of magical realism, I think, that comes into the story later. And I just found it to be all telling and no showing, and I didn't care about the characters again. This one was a real disappointment for me because I really loved 7 Days in June. I thought that was an excellent romance. It's probably still up there with like one of my top romances. And this one just really fell flat for me, which was incredibly disappointing. Up next, I DNF'd Flawless by Elsie Silver on page 86 out of 378. And this is a romance where a professional bull rider blows his biggest sponsorship and is assigned a minder from his PR agency to make sure that he doesn't continue to do that sort of stuff. And they start to fall for each other. It's cringy. It's set in and around my hometown of Calgary, and that was very inaccurate setting. I think there was a part where she's like in the high rise looking out at the mountains, and then she's like, oh, if only I could have been to the mountains once in my life. And I was like, you could have. Your dad's rich. There's no way that you didn't go one time in your entire life to the mountains, which are a literally 1 hour drive away from downtown Calgary. Like, that, it's such a stupid nitpicky thing, but I was like, there's no way that you're from a rich family and you've never been to the mountains, and that your dad doesn't own like a little condo or something in Canmore, like in the mountains, and you went there on weekends. Like, that just, it's not possible. For sure, most rich people in Calgary have been to the mountains because like it's literally 1 hour drive and you're in the mountains. So I couldn't do it. Also the father in this was horrible, and just a me thing, but it was too sexual for my preferences. I have a very low spice tolerance in my romance books, so this one was just like right in there with the sex, and I wasn't feeling it. It also had a trope that I really hate, where a woman has to like keep a man-child in check and like, you know, teach him how to be a good person and not be like a little idiot who ruins his career prospects. And I just cannot stand love interests in romances who start off at like an emotional age of 8 years old. Like, there's nothing attractive about that. So not for me. I had a couple people who actually have read this book, and they're like, yeah, Sarah, you shouldn't have tried to read this book. This is not for you. So I am happy that I stopped reading it. Up next, I tried to read The Great Believers by Rebecca Makkai, and I stopped on page 234 out of 418. This is a literary fiction book set in 1985 and 2015, and in the 80s it follows a gay man and his friend group as a lot of them are dying and getting sick with AIDS. And then in the 2010s, it follows one of the little sisters from that friend group, and she's tracking down her estranged daughter in Paris, and then kind of runs into, I think, someone from that friend group, or like who's kind of loosely associated with them, and is having to like confront all of the trauma and fallout of the AIDS epidemic. This was originally going to be a book club book with my friends, but none of us could really get through it, so we just stopped reading it and moved on to something else. I just didn't really connect strongly to any of the characters, and it sounds really good, but I just kept putting it down and not picking it up again, so I don't know if it was maybe the writing or something. I don't know, I just couldn't get through it. Then I tried to read The Water Outlaws by S.L. Huang. I stopped on page 82 out of 479. This follows Lin Chong, who is an expert arms instructor, and she has her life and stash ripped away from her and is arrested. She escapes and then is recruited by a group of mountain outlaws who believe in justice for outcasts, and is trying to like go against the corrupt empire. I just, again, was not super invested. I was not wanting to pick it up when I put it down, so I just stopped reading it because it sounded interesting, but I don't know, something about it wasn't scratching the book itch at the time. Then I tried to read Heavenbreaker by Sarah Wolfe, and I stopped that one on page 144 out of 424. And like, I honestly picked this one up because I was like, The premise sounds kind of interesting, like Pacific Rim-ish, but it had like the really nice sprayed edges and everything, and that was really the main thing that got me to try and read it. Not good. This is a science fiction book about these like robots that are left over from the war, whatever that was, and now they're used in like jousting tournaments. And again, it's like Pacific Rim, they're like people inside them who control them. And the main character is the Duke's bastard, and her mother was murdered by an assassin, and so she's like vowed vengeance on the noble class and is joining these jousts to kind of infiltrate and get revenge. The world building I found to be really lackluster, and the characters as well. I don't understand their motives at all, and I was almost 150 pages in, and I was just like, I don't understand what's going on with this. Also, just to kind of like the final straw that broke the camel's back was the main character. Her name is Sin Alley, like Allison, but they've just like swapped the syllables. So that was kind of like the final nail in the coffin, and it was what stopped me reading it. I was like, I can't do this. But those are all of the books that I either did not enjoy or did not finish in 2024. Not bad, considering I read 207 books. There were not a ton of them that I really hated. I would say there's probably only like 2 or 3 that I was really like, I don't like this. And most of them were like, that wasn't as good as I wanted it to be. So pretty good overall. And like I said, my next video is going to be my favorites, and I'm really excited to talk about those. There's a lot of them. So keep your eye on this channel, and that will be out sometime soon-ish, I hope. But thank you so much for watching this video. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I hope to see you next time. Now go read a book. I'm sure I'm not sure. The shortest book that I read this year, not this year. So yay, everyone say thank you library, because we love our local libraries.